With legacy production ending any moment now, the WRX is Subaru's last sedan in America. But it's more than that for me. This is also America's last affordable all-wheel drive sports car, and I would buy this over any of the hot hatches that it competes with in the US. Let's talk about why and why I would get specifically this WRX. This is the WRX TS. In Subaru speak, TS stands for Tuned by STI. So this is not a full-on STI model, but it is tuned by that division. It's probably too much to hope for a full-on STI model because Subaru has a lot of other things on their plate, and let's just say that the WRX is not exactly selling like hotcakes, not selling like a Forester. The TS model, think of it basically as the better GT. It has the Brembo brakes, the adaptive suspension system, the Recaro seats, the LCD cluster, but it has a manual transmission, and the GT is only sold with a CVT. Subaru tries to call it a Subaru performance transmission. It's a CVT. It's not your imagination. There are definitely fewer affordable performance cars available in the US than in any time in recent memory. And the WRX truly stands alone because it's a sedan, not a hot hatch like most of the competition, and it has all-wheel drive, unlike a GLI or an Elantra N. With a starting price well under the average new car transaction price in the US, it's also relatively affordable, starting at $38,920 for 2025, going on up to $49,270 when you fully equip your WRX. That is less on average than a Volkswagen Golf R, all-wheel drive option there, or the GR Corolla, also all-wheel drive, but those are quite small inside. And on average, you're not going to be paying a dealer markup on a WRX like you will on a Civic Type R. That Civic Type R doesn't have the big selling point for the WRX, which again is that all-wheel drive system. And if you want an automatic, you can get one here, but you can't get one in the Type R. I wouldn't get the automatic in the WRX, but if you really wanted one, it is available. As you work your way up the trim ladder, there are a few subtle tweaks to the trim parts on the outside of the WRX, but visually, they're all very, very similar and very grown-up, especially compared to other generations of the WRX. We still have the iconic hood scoop, of course. Every model has full LED headlights, but the base trim does not get the steering responsive headlights that you'll find in every other trim, including this one. And these are some of the best headlights in this segment. They're really bright at night, they have a nice sharp cutoff, and they steer very aggressively. So definitely the headlight I would want living out here in the forest. We also have LED fog lights. Those are standard, they're not optional. At 183.8 inches, this is almost exactly the same size as an Elantra N. It's a little bit shorter than a Volkswagen GLI on the outside, but on the inside, it's right about the same size. The rest of the competition, they're all hatchbacks or sportbacks, whatever you want to call the Civic Type R. The big thing though is that most of them have a more consistent roof line going to the rear, giving you more rear seat headroom and definitely more cargo room in the back. I was surprised. In this generation of WRX and Impreza, Subaru split them apart, and the WRX is sedan only, and there's no non-WRX sedan, and the Impreza is hatchback only, and there's no high-performance version of the Impreza. Although, I guess you could say logically that this is the high-performance version of the Impreza. The MSRP of the WRX GT and the TS are basically the same, but they have different personalities, and it's really obvious when you take a closer look at the wheels and tires. We have a lower profile tire here, 245/35 R19s, 19-inch wheel of course. Every other WRX gets a 245/40 R18. The GT was formerly the only model with adaptive dampers, and it was definitely tuned to be a little bit more comfortable, I think, than some WRX owners wanted. So this adaptive suspension system has been differently tuned, and we have the lower profile tires on it. Of course, we then have the manual transmission as well, so this feels much more like what I think people were looking for in a grown-up WRX. The biggest complaint among the Subaru faithful is that there's not enough power happening under this hood, and that's a complaint I happen to agree with. There was a time where 271 horsepower would have been a good showing in a WRX, but this is also the heaviest WRX, and the competition is fielding 300, 400 horsepower with MSRPs that are not far removed from this model here. Now, you could crank the dial up yourself aftermarket and get 350 horsepower out of this engine, but you're probably going to want the 6-speed manual transmission if you plan on doing that. And thankfully, that's easy to do because the Premium and Limited and TS trims have the 6-speed manual standard. It's optional in Premium, Limited, and Standard on the GT trim. I was always sad about that GT being CVT only, but that's why we have this TS trim now. There is something else to keep in mind, however. If you get the CVT, you'll actually get more power on the rear axle because that all-wheel drive system is different than this one. It's tuned to send 55% of the power to the rear, 45% on the front, and the manual transmission is split evenly 50-50. At first, I didn't think it would have that much of an impact, but being able to drive them back to back on a track at the launch event for the WRX, you can actually discover that you will feel that rear power bias in the model with the CVT. It's just that it's not as much fun in every other situation. Jumping into the front seats, I found these Recaros actually quite comfortable. Some Recaro seats feel a little bit too narrow, especially in the shoulder area for me, but I think these are a really great design. They're also more comfortable than a lot of Recaro seats I've been in lately, although there's no adjustable lumbar support. That is one thing I would love to see on this seat. We have a manual tilt telescopic steering column with a reasonable range of motion and a pretty decent amount of headroom. You actually get a bit more in the TS because we don't have the option of getting a moonroof. And if you do get the moonroof up front, you'll lose about 1 inch of front row headroom. But the big benefit for the WRX, especially versus something like a GR Corolla, is the back seat. This seat was comfortably adjusted for a 6'5" passenger. I have several inches of legroom left. And there's even enough room in here to put a rear-facing child seat behind me driving the vehicle. My daughter's 2 months old now, and this is comfortably adjusted for the two of us. There's enough clearance. We'll take a look at that a little bit more in a second, but that is absolutely something you could not do in the GR Corolla, and you would be really hard-pressed to do in something like a Golf or a Golf R or a GTI, etc. There's just not enough room in those vehicles. On the other hand, they are going to give you more headroom in the back for adults. And here, you have to crane your head to one side. There's just no way to get your head back there without it really digging into the ceiling. Of course, practicality-wise, we do have a shoulder belt that comes right out of that seat area there, and it doesn't interfere with the latch anchors on the side. And for greater cargo practicality, the rear seats fold in a 60-40 fashion. There's also a fold-down armrest with cup holders in it. Going in for a closer look, Subaru has opted for these sort of leatherette flaps with Velcro to cover the latch anchors, which are recessed fairly deeply into the seat back. So you're not going to feel them as an adult, but it does make fishing around for them a little bit trickier. And these are also kind of a pain to shove back in place. Subaru just loves these Velcro flaps because we have one over here for the top of that seatbelt buckle, and then one over here for the top of that seatbelt buckle as well. But we also have something very unusual under this one, which is a fifth latch anchor. Here's how that works. You would use that latch anchor in coordination with the passenger side inboard latch anchor over here. And if I can hold the camera while holding this base station, let's see if we can do this to demonstrate. It is compatible with rigid style latch anchors because the spacing is appropriate. So you latch that one in and then kind of fish around again for that flap over there, latch that one in, and then you'll notice that the car seat is at a weird angle. That's okay because of the way these adjust, but you should know that this latch anchor actually sticks out of the seat back more than this latch anchor over here. It's kind of an unusual design. You can still, however, latch that child seat base station in absolutely no problem, except if you want to use the seat belt over here on this side. Obviously, that's going to be covering that seatbelt buckle, but it does give you more clearance over here for the driver's side passenger and a little bit of a convenient reach if you have a kid in the middle and you want someone to sit in the back and help care for the child. Hot hatches offer the promise of small SUV practicality with the driving nature of a sedan. An actual sedan, not so much. We have under 13 cubic feet of storage space back here. I was able to squeeze 3 24-inch roller bags in the back, but not a lot of additional cargo. And the trunk is not as deep as I would like. You really can't close the lid with a 22-inch roller bag in that position. Something like a Civic Type R, you're going to get nearly double the cargo capacity in the back. And if I lift up the load floor, kind of a missing opportunity. We do have a little bit of extra storage space here. This is where we have the can of Fix-A-Flat, tire iron, and jack kit. But this foam divider is quite bulky. With that out of the way, you can see just how much room that big foam divider occupies in the trunk. But you'll notice something else. We actually have a post for mounting a spare tire. And I measured it out. A full-size spare would actually fit back here if you wanted to do that yourself. As I said before, we're taking a look at the TS trim, so we don't have the option for a power moonroof. If you want that, you're going to have to choose one of the other trims. We also do not have sliding sun visors, so these don't slide or extend in any way. They just go from one side over there to the other, but the driver and the passenger both have vanity mirrors. The driver and front passenger get height adjustable head restraints. We have that WRX TS logo embroidered on that head restraint. Again, Recaro seats here. Very similar to the GT model, only instead of red, we get the blue accents here. So definitely kind of a Smurfy blue theme in here. I do like these two-tone blue accents that we're seeing in more performance cars in this category. Really am a fan of that. Again, you can see the aggressive bolstering on the side and the seat bottom cushion, but a relatively open shoulder area, which I definitely appreciate. Moving over to the front doors, we have more of that blue accenting going on there, some ultra suede up top, the imitation leather there, and then definitely hard plastics down lower on the door. We also have some imitation carbon fiber going on right there around that door handle. More of that faux suede on the dashboard. It looks like passengers have been drawing patterns in that apparently. We have blue stitching here with some of the imitation leather below that, kind of a metallic effect strip there. Hard plastics down there at the bottom of the dashboard, including that bin-style glove compartment. I had no problem fitting an 11-inch tablet computer inside. And speaking of tablet computers, we have a big gold tablet right here in the center. This is the classic Subaru infotainment system that we're seeing in everything except for the new Outback. That's going in a different direction. So if you want a WRX with a different infotainment screen, I don't know, stay tuned. That might be coming to this model at some point in the future. One interesting touch with this touchscreen is that it still functions like other Subaru models, in that if you have the heated seats on, it'll actually remember your setting when you turn the car off and power cycle it again. That's been a Subaru thing for a while. It's kind of why they have the toggle switches for heated seats in other models in their lineups. That way they stay on for people that live in colder climates. The touchscreen, it's pretty easy to use. Of course, we get the big screen format for Apple CarPlay right there. They have made some subtle changes over time to have better access to certain controls. The drive mode select over here, for instance, we got lots of options: comfort, normal, sport, individual, where you can actually adjust all those various settings. Again, this one has the adaptive suspension system, so we find that right there. And you can also change the modes with this mode button on the steering wheel, so that will cycle through those modes right there for you. 2-zone automatic climate control, 12-volt power port. We actually have an auxiliary input, which is kind of cute still. USB-C and USB-A, but no wireless charger there. I actually don't find that to be a problem at all, since I never use a wireless charger, although the CarPlay is wireless. On the shifter, reverse is exactly where God intended it, over there and then down. I really dislike it when it's to the left and up. That's just me, and parallel parking or multi-point turns, etc. I find this a lot more useful. Handbrake right there, 2 big cup holders, really easy to use, and you can remove that if you want to use that more like a storage area. Then we have another bit of Smurf blue here and a teeny tiny little storage compartment. Remember that this is a longitudinal engine vehicle, not a transverse engine vehicle like most of the competition. So there is actually a transmission under here and a rear-wheel drive style transmission tunnel just due to the architecture of the vehicle. Moving over to the driver's side, we have the new Subaru full LCD instrument cluster, but it does appear that we're actually getting a slight different design in the Outback. So I don't know if a software update is coming to this at some point in the future. You could choose between a few different basic layouts there, so map layout, more of a dial layout, and then you can choose what's going on over here on this side, or you can actually collapse it and just have that option turn off. The steering wheel, it's basically the same as the other Subaru models in the lineup. We have track forward, backward, volume up, down over here. We have the buttons that control that multifunction LCD cluster over there, the adaptive cruise control and steering assist buttons over here, the mode button, and then of course we have a favorite button as well. So that takes you basically over to the individual option. All right, it is time to get the WRX out on the road with that less than stellar launch. I'm pretty sure this would be 0 to 60 in slower than 6 seconds. My best time here was 5.9. If, however, you're willing to roast the clutch a little bit and you're a really good dancer on the pedals and of course with the shifter, you could get as low as about 5.5 seconds. That is notably longer than something like a Civic Type R. Keep in mind, of course, that's 2-wheel drive, doesn't have the same sort of all-wheel drive bog issues that a vehicle like this can have, but of course it has more power as well. Something like a Volkswagen Golf R, 0 to 60 in about 4 seconds, 4.2 seconds thereabouts with the dual clutch transmission. That is definitely a hoot and a half to drive, but it has a little bit less personality than the WRX. Remember that when we're talking about manual transmission vehicles in 0 to 60 times, it really comes down to the driver. How willing are you to try and roast your clutch, get that perfect launch? How skilled are you at it? And that's kind of what makes them fun, because in an automatic transmission vehicle, no fuss, no muss, you just put your foot down and you go 0 to 60 in whatever the vehicle is capable of. Here, it takes a bit more skill. But it also means that a wide variety of the competition is quite simply going to be quicker 0 to 60 than this. On the other hand, the stopping distance is shockingly good. These are not the most aggressive tires out there, and this still went 60 to 0 in just 105 feet. That is a really, really good stopping distance. Before they added the Brembo brake package to the WRX, I thought it was a little bit underbraked. I thought for the average person it's probably not going to be a problem, but if you did plan on taking your vehicle out to the track on weekends, you might want something a bit more aggressive as far as the brake package goes, and that's exactly what they've done with these big Brembos. No worry about brake fade, etc., even though this weighs nearly 3,500 pounds as equipped. Obviously, all-wheel drive adds weight that you don't find in all of the competition. So certainly options out there are going to be lighter, front-wheel drive, etc., but they're not going to have the personality of this. And that's what makes the WRX the WRX. It's that boxer engine sound. As you rev it up, you know, it's not the most refined sounding engine, especially under load. So let's go ahead and go second gear here maybe. That's about right. It has that particular sound to it, especially at idle, that you don't get in the 4-cylinder inline competition. But again, personality. Refinement, that is lacking a bit. If you want refinement, you want the Volkswagen Golf R. That is a fantastically German polished package. It's basically discount Audi in a Volkswagen wrapper. And there's nothing wrong with that. But personally, I prefer things that are just a little bit rougher around the edges, a little bit more unique, and that's certainly what the WRX is. Now, as far as the drivetrain design goes, the layout of this system is a little bit more BMW than Volkswagen, in that we have a longitudinal engine. It's a rear-wheel drive based system as far as its general design goes, even though, again, power is split 50-50 with the manual transmission, and most Subarus are actually front power biased these days, but the layout, very BMW. But that doesn't mean that the curb weight balance is very BMW. In fact, 60% of the weight is up front. That's because this is actually more appropriately close to something like an Audi A6 or an Audi A7, in that the entire engine is in front of the front axle. And of course, it's that boxer engine design, which is a little bit heavier than an inline 4-cylinder engine would be. And as I said before, if you get the model with the CVT, then it's actually going to send a little bit more power to the rear axle. It's never going to be tail happy. It's always going to be very neutral, very civilized as far as its handling goes. It's difficult to get this to step out in any way that's not easily correctable. So if you're looking for something tail happy and fun, get yourself a Mustang, get a BRZ. That's what they're about. The WRX has a different mission. But that's definitely a mission that I'm on board with, because I love an all-wheel drive vehicle like this. I spent a lot of time in a Volvo V70R. I had one for 3 years and about 120,000 miles, and I absolutely loved that combination of high horsepower, all-wheel drive, manual transmission. That's what the WRX is all about still. So handling, absolutely an A. Ride quality, that's also an A, because for a vehicle like this, the adaptive dampers make a big, big difference. The adaptive dampers are the big difference between the TR and the TS, and they're the big reason I kind of like the TS more than the TR. But before I talk to that, let's use this opportunity to talk about why I like reverse where it is in this car. And I'd love to know your thoughts on where reverse should be in a vehicle with a manual, because if you want to do a multi-point turn on a road like this, since there's a rock there, it's a lot easier to do this without paying attention to where reverse is. Yes, I know it's still gated if it's all the way over to the left and up right next to first gear, but for me, this is simply the better place, the more logical place at least, for me to have reverse. This also, I think, is a good reason also why I like all-wheel drive living where I do, because if I were going to try and do that same sort of thing in a Civic Type R or something like a GLI or a GTI, I would be worried about the traction ability or lack thereof of the vehicle. But anyway, back to the adaptive suspension system. Right now, it's in its most comfortable mode, and it really makes a good daily driver. Also, I would say it's better suited for maybe the mission of the WRX, which is kind of that rally-style car where you could drive it on road surfaces like this. If you live out in the country and you're looking for something that's fun to drive on the weekend, but can also bomb down roads like this, WRX is the car to be in, because the ride quality is significantly better in here, even over those larger imperfections like that. than something like a Volkswagen Golf R. That is definitely firm, even though it also has adaptive dampers, ditto something like the Civic Type R. And I think for the TS, they found just the right balance for the suspension, because we do get those lower profile tires. The suspension has been retuned versus the GT, so it is a little bit firmer. And then of course we get those low profile tires, but it's still not punishing. It still has a really good balance. Quiet cabins have never really been a Subaru strong suit, and this WRX isn't any different. In our new cabin testing scores, we measured 69.5 decibels in here. Remember, they did recently repave the road that we test on, and a lot of our numbers went down. But 69 decibels is still louder than average for this segment, even compared against something like a Civic Type R, etc. This is going to be a little bit noisier inside. I think it's just due to the harmonics of the Boxer engine and their tire choice, also a little bit less sound deadening in the wheel wells. I found myself actually rolling along in 5th gear more than 6th gear because it kind of reduces some of those harmonics in the cabin. Fuel economy, though, that has been pretty decent. We've been averaging 27 miles per gallon over a week of mixed driving. Admittedly, on the highway, you're going to get a better fuel economy score if you keep your speeds a little bit lower because of the 6-speed manual transmission's ratios. But for the average driver out there, this is a pretty decently efficient vehicle, and it's certainly going to be more efficient than the average crossover. There are a lot of fun options to choose from in this segment, so let's take a deeper dive into some of them, talk about why I would get the WRX over them. For 2025 and likely 2026 again, there are 4 different trim levels of the WRX to choose from. The base model is the premium trim starting at $38,920. One thing I really love about Subaru's lineup is that they don't charge crazy prices for some of the optional colors. In fact, as far as I can see, there's just one color, the sort of purpley color, that's actually an extra charge option. If you want a red one, no problem, same price. The top-end model is the TS, well, sort of the top-end model, because the GT and the TS are the 2 coordinate top-end trims, right around $49,200, including destination. But I would definitely get the TS, unless you absolutely cannot handle a manual transmission in daily driving. Because the GT, I've always been sad that the GT features and functions were not available with the manual transmission, especially the adaptive suspension system, something I really, really want in my WRX. I think it makes it a lot more daily driver livable. Well, Subaru fixed that with the TS trim. But of course, what they did not fix is that CVT, or the Subaru Performance Transmission, whatever you want to call it. It's still a continuously variable automatic with basically the same core design as every other Subaru CVT in their lineup. I really wish that they had run out and found an 8-speed automatic, a regular automatic, say from Aisin, something like that, or worked with a company to create a really cool dual-clutch transmission for the WRX. Why didn't they do that? Well, logically because they don't sell very many WRX, and they sell even fewer automatic transmission WRX models, so it probably just didn't make sense. And that's a pity, because a WRX with a thoroughly modern dual-clutch transmission that could handle 300, 350 horsepower, something like that, that would be a ton of fun, and I suspect that it's the transmissions that are really keeping this WRX back in terms of its horsepower figures. That's probably why we don't have an STI along those lines. Anyway, let's move on to the competition, because there really isn't much to talk about. There is nothing like this in the US, so let's talk about the almost models. Obviously, the Elantra N comes into play here, because it is less expensive, starting at $35,595, but if you don't need all-wheel drive and you really want a front-wheel drive performance sedan, I would say it's the best currently. The Elantra N is hardcore in ways that the WRX isn't. They really focused on lightweighting. It's quicker 0 to 60. They focused on more of the entire package, I would say, than Subaru did. The all-wheel drive system definitely tends to be heavy in this model, and some of the components are, a little bit older. With the Hyundai, they really went all in, especially on the dual-clutch transmission availability in some of their N models, but I would still get the manual transmission. The main thing with the Elantra N is that it feels more nimble, it feels lighter. Obviously, it doesn't have that all-wheel drive system, but I love all-wheel drive, and I would give up some of that nimbleness and some of that handling ability
to get the all-wheel drive system that we find in the Subaru, because it's not that much more expensive really than the Elantra. And interestingly, it's also not that much more expensive than a Jetta GLI, because the GLI starts at $34,440 and it gets significantly less power, 228 horsepower, and it doesn't feel as special or as premium as the Elantra. In fact, even though this is not an Elantra video, I would easily say if you're considering something like a Jetta GLI, I would just go for the Elantra N. It feels more special, it's definitely quicker, it's more fun to drive, etc. The Jetta, I think it looks handsome, but it's not that level of fun that we find in the Hyundai. And of course doesn't have all-wheel drive like the WRX. So between these three, I think it's an easy win for the WRX, with the caveat that if you do want quicker 0 to 60 times and sharper handling, you're going to find that in the Elantra N. Now, what about the Civic? Because for a lot of folks in this segment, the Civic is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. It's the one to beat. Well, there isn't quite a Civic like this, and that's for a few reasons. Obviously, the big one is that there's no all-wheel drive Civic. I've always thought that was a bummer. I would really love to see an all-wheel drive Type R. I know Honda could do it. That would be all manner of fun, but for some reason they have chosen not to. Some argue that's for the purity of the lightweight front-wheel drive style, but a lot of American consumers especially are just not that enamored with a lightweight front-wheel drive hot hatch, hot sedan, like a lot of Europeans still are. And that's why we don't find as many options available here as there used to be. In the Civic lineup, we do have a higher performance sedan, the Civic Si, that's $32,190 starting. However, a Civic hybrid sedan is actually quicker 0 to 60. And I suspect that if you jammed all the Civic Si bits onto that hybrid, you could make it go around a corner just about as well also. And you have the option of, for instance, getting a Civic hybrid sedan and swapping Civic Type R parts onto it, because the front suspension and the rear suspension components, the brakes, etc. from a Type R will all just bolt right onto that Civic hybrid. And you could have yourself, well, kind of a Honda Prelude, to be honest. And that's sort of what they're doing with that Civic Coupe, I guess you'd call it, really coming up soon. At any rate, we also have the Civic Type R, which is theoretically $47,090, a little bit less than the WRX, but remember, A, it doesn't have all-wheel drive, B, there's no automatic transmission should you want one. Again, I think I would lean towards the manual anyway, but if you really want one, it is not available there. The bigger thing, though, is the markups. On the Type R, we are still seeing, even all these years later, reasonable markups on the Type R. Now, obviously, if you're looking for good resale value, I'm not sure how much of a market there is out there for a Type R that's really been rung around the ringer, but, if you're looking for resale value, it's clearly there with the Type R. It's been absolutely excellent. Those resale values are high. The markups are high. Just keep in mind, you're probably not really going to be buying one for $47,000 unless you really, really reach out to a lot of dealers across the U.S. and hunt for one. The markups have subsided from their crazy highs, but they're still there. On the WRX, it's super easy to get without a markup. In fact, it's actually easy to get some with a discount. And that's why, for me, if I were shopping in this segment, I think it just checks all the right boxes. I love the Type R, but it is just too much horsepower for my area of the woods and front-wheel drive only. It is so easy to spin the front tires. Something I really noticed at the launch event of that vehicle. If the tarmac is perfect, there's no sand, no gravel on the road, not even a leaf, then maybe you can get a really elegant launch in the Civic Type R. But if it is less than perfect, then it's just going to be a cacophony of front wheel spinning. I think that's kind of fun and a hoot and a half in its own way, but it's not as productive as an all-wheel drive setup like we find in the WRX. Now, the WRX is by no means perfect. I think that there are some areas around the interior where it could have been nicer, especially for something pushing $50,000. But at the same time, the average new car in America is, oddly enough, about the same price as a fully loaded WRX. So, for the cost of an average new car in America, you could get actually quite an unaverage car in America. Manual transmission, sedan, reasonable 0 to 60. What's not to love? Anyway, let me know what you think about all that down there. And would you get one rather than the average new car in America? See all of you later.